My name is Erin Whitmore. I'm 32 years old. You're not on the list. Please leave. My sister said it calmly, loud enough for the music to pause for a beat. It was a formal wedding held inside a military banquet hall on base. My nephew, the eldest son of my sister, was marrying the daughter of a brigadier general. The hall was decked out like a promotion ceremony, polished silver floor-length gowns, uniforms in navy and green, and enough brass to weigh down the room. The walls bore portraits of commanders. The air smelled like cologne champagne and approval. My sister, eldest in the family, the one who inherited tradition, stood in front of me like a gatekeeper. She said I wasn't invited, that I didn't have a seat at the family table. I still had the invitation card in my purse. She didn't need to see it. I stood there, still holding the glass of water I'd just picked up. My mother turned her face away. An uncle fiddled with his shoelaces. No one said anything. A few guests looked uneasy, but the silence between their glances was heavier than the room itself. I didn't argue. Not a word. I simply placed the glass down on a nearby tray, nodded slightly to my sister, and walked out of the hall. My heels didn't make a sound on the thick carpet. As I passed the head table, a man in full dress uniform, older with silver at his temples, looked up at me. Our eyes met for one full second. Nobody else seemed to notice, but he did. Something flickered behind his gaze. He tilted his head, then leaned toward the officer next to him and whispered. I didn't turn around. I only exhaled when I reached the corridor. I stood there between the marble columns of that government-issued hallway. No one knew the truth they were ignoring. No one knew, but they would. Because this wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed, but it might be the last. Come with me, to see who I've become, and what happened to the one who once silenced me. The hallway opened to a back terrace tiled in stone and quiet under the late afternoon light. Trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres rested on folding tables beneath a canopy. I walked between two white pillars and stopped by the railing. The grass was clipped sharp. The shadows had grown long. I leaned my hand on the edge. The stone was cool. There was a small crack beneath my fingers. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry either. There was just a spreading stillness inside me, like all sound had been drained from my chest. Still, but not hollow. I thought about the man at the table, the colonel maybe higher. His look was the only one that hadn't passed over me, like I didn't exist. No one in my family knew I'd come back. No one had asked. My sister hadn't spoken my name aloud at any family event for years. I was left out of photos, of group messages, of stories told to new in-laws. Once I came home on my father's death anniversary. My sister looked through the screen door and said, "Mom thought you were busy." Then she closed it. This wasn't new. But this time I hadn't come with expectations. I had brought only one thing, presence. Sometimes just being there is enough. A door opened behind me. I heard footsteps. I didn't turn. They stopped a few feet away, light measured. A young soldier stood nearby in dress uniform. He didn't speak, but I felt him. Maybe assigned to monitor the exits. Maybe not. I didn't ask. He didn't leave. He just stood like he was waiting. I kept watching the lawn. A squirrel darted along the edge of the landscaping, froze, looked at me, and vanished into a bush. A breeze brought in the scent of fresh paper, someone's perfume from the ballroom, and that metallic dampness only military bases seemed to carry. I thought of my father. He once told me if no one lets you through the door, build your own gate. I stood straight, nodded once to the young soldier, and walked back in. The ballroom was warmer when I walked back in, or maybe I just noticed it more. I slipped in quietly, not to return to the table. I had no intention of reclaiming a seat, but to retrieve my purse. I had left it under one of the reception chairs. The soldier remained by the door, saying nothing, his presence now a quiet line between worlds. The music had resumed. People laughed again. The sting of my sister's words had evaporated into champagne bubbles and polite conversation. They always knew how to forget me quickly. I used to believe it was my fault. I was born the second daughter. No war stories were told about my birth, no proud letters sent to old commanders like they had for my sister. My father was already slowing down, by then retired earlier than expected after a training accident left him with limited use of his left arm. He stayed home while my sister followed him into Legacy JROTC Honor Roll the West Point tour when she was 16. I watched from behind corners from stairwells. I knew how to be quiet even then. It wasn't that I didn't try. I did. But I tried in ways that were invisible to my family. I preferred books over drills, silence over salutes. I didn't like the way orders felt in my mouth. I asked questions which made my father sigh and later made my sister glare. In high school, I joined theater. My mother said I'd outgrow it. I didn't. I wrote essays that won state awards. No one read them at home. I volunteered at the library after school, not knowing then that quiet service meant little to people who only respected uniforms and rank. My sister got a scholarship to a military college. The family threw a party. I got accepted to a private liberal arts school out of state. No one noticed until the tuition bill arrived. That was the first time my sister called me selfish. Dad died my sophomore year. I remember flying home in a cheap overnight seat, clutching a suit I borrowed from a roommate. I was 20. My sister delivered the eulogy. She wore his medals over a tailored jacket. She looked every inch the legacy child. Afterward, my mother said she was proud of her girls, then looked at only one of us. I never expected inheritance. But I didn't expect silence either. They kept his things in a locked trunk. I wasn't given a key. I wasn't even told what was inside. After graduation, I left the country for 2 years first to teach, then to simply exist elsewhere. I stopped sending updates when no one replied. I thought maybe if I came back with something impressive, they'd see me. I came back with peace. That wasn't enough. By the time my sister was promoted to captain, she had a family, a circle of decorated friends, and a house that looked like a recruiting brochure. I visited once. The framed photos didn't include me. Eventually, I stopped knocking. There are some families where disconnection happens like a slow leak. In mine, it was policy. I was loved, I suppose, but like a foreign cousin, welcomed for holidays, left off the duty roster. And still, I never wanted revenge. I never wanted to show up and embarrass them or prove a point. I just wanted once to be in the room and not feel like an intruder. But the thing is, you live outside a room long enough, you begin to build walls of your own. I started over in a city 3 states away. Took jobs no one in my family would recognize as success. Night shift clerk, research assistant. I earned another degree quietly. I lived in a walk-up apartment with peeling paint and a fire escape that creaked when you breathed too hard. But it was mine. I learned how to disappear without bitterness. Then one night, I saw something on the news, a program, a call, a classified unit recruiting specialists for a mission profile that was both humanitarian and strategic. They needed people who could listen, observe, blend. People without attachments. People who knew how to be invisible. I applied. I wasn't the only one with scars or silence or something to prove, but I was one of the few who passed the vetting, then the training, then the first deployment. But none of that was in the family group chat. None of that was in the scrapbook my sister kept for her children. And so, when I received the invitation to her son's wedding, addressed incorrectly, sent late, I knew what it meant. It wasn't a gesture, it was a formality. A box ticked. Still, I came. Not to reclaim anything, just to be present, just to see what had changed, and maybe quietly to find out if anything had stayed the same. I didn't expect a welcome, but I also didn't expect to be erased again this time in front of strangers who didn't know the rules of our family's silence. I had been sitting for maybe 12 minutes, just long enough to finish half the glass of water and scan the reception layout where the commanding officer sat, where the family tables ended, where the exits were. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I hadn't drawn attention to myself. Then my sister saw me. She didn't walk toward me. She waved one of the ushers over someone younger, likely enlisted, not aware of the layers at play. I watched her lean in, say something low and clipped and gesture. She didn't even look back. The usher came over polite and hesitant. He bent slightly, voice quiet. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but there seems to be some confusion about your seat assignment." I nodded, smiled. "I'm sure there is." That was when my sister came over herself. In front of 2 tables of family members, some I hadn't seen in years, some I barely remembered, she said it. "You're not on the list. Please leave." She didn't need to say more. It wasn't about seating. It never had been. It was about reminding the room who belonged. I don't remember exactly what I felt in that moment. Not anger, not hurt. More like watching an old injury reopen where the scar never quite took. What caught me more off guard was how quickly everyone turned away, as if they'd been bracing for it, as if they had practiced. Forks clicked back to plates. Someone coughed. My mother looked down, busying herself with a napkin. No one reached out. Not even my cousin Jamie, who once sent me a postcard when I lived in Morocco, scribbled with, "You're the only interesting one in the family." I had no allies in that room. That was the real weight of it, not the words spoken, but the quiet collusion that followed. I walked out not just from a wedding, but from a performance they'd rehearsed without me. I left my purse under the chair. I didn't notice until I was already outside, but I didn't go back in for it right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to disturb the choreography. They needed me gone. I gave them that briefly. Outside on the terrace, I stood still while the wind pressed against my arms and the music floated behind glass. It sounded thinner out here. Hollow. And then the soldier arrived and the air shifted, and then I walked back in. This time, I didn't look for my seat. I went straight to the back where the bags and coats were stored. I didn't speak to anyone. I kept my steps quiet. But the weight of what had just happened walked with me. It wasn't the first time my sister had removed me from a space. Years ago, she excluded me from our father's retirement dinner, even though it had been held at the same dining hall where I used to volunteer as a teenager. Later, when our father passed and she arranged the service, she didn't list me as next of kin on the program. She told me it had been a space issue. The pattern wasn't accidental. It was designed. But design takes effort, and that strangely gave me power, because people who go to great lengths to erase someone are in a way bound to them. I knew that now. I understood the architecture. Still, knowledge doesn't soothe the sting. It only frames it. Back in the ballroom, I lingered near the edge of the room. Not hidden, but unnoticed. A position I had grown used to. That's when I saw the colonel again. He was seated 2 tables from the head beside a woman in a pale dress uniform with commander stripes. He leaned in, whispered something, then subtly pointed toward me. The woman glanced, blinked, then returned the gesture with a single nod. It was barely perceptible, but I had learned to see the smallest movements. That's what survival teaches you. I felt no fear, just a shift. And perhaps for the first time that night, I felt seen not by family, but by people who understood different kinds of protocol. Still, nothing happened. Not yet. The music continued. The speeches resumed. My sister stood at the head of the table raising a glass for the groom and bride. Her voice was clear, her smile practiced. She had everything she wanted: recognition, respect, legacy. And still she made room in that control for one final act, removing me, which meant I still mattered, which meant she still watched. Even from above her pedestal, she had not forgotten me, that I thought might be her greatest miscalculation. There's a kind of ache that doesn't feel like pain, not sharp, not stabbing, but like an emptiness in the chest that echoes when you breathe too deeply. That's what it felt like standing near the ballroom wall, holding my purse again, watching my sister toast to legacy while I became once more invisible. I should have left then, quietly, before the next course, before the family slideshow, before someone decided to escort me out more formally. I stayed. Why? Because I needed one more minute. One more minute to convince myself that I didn't care. And in that minute, doubt slipped in like smoke through a crack in a door. Maybe she's right, it whispered. Maybe I really don't belong. Maybe I never did. Maybe everything I've built, everything I've survived wasn't resilience. Maybe it was avoidance, disguise. A long, slow vanishing no one asked me to perform. I turned away from the room and walked down the corridor again, this time toward the lower-level restroom. A place where I could be alone. A place with no ceremony. The lights flickered slightly as I entered. One bulb buzzed with that faint electric hum that only comes in buildings too old for comfort, but too institutional for charm. I stood in front of the mirror, the kind of mirror that doesn't flatter. Fluorescent, unforgiving. It showed me a woman who looked composed, whose lipstick hadn't faded, whose dress still sat perfectly over her shoulders. But the eyes, they betrayed me. I looked like a woman who had walked a long road to arrive in a room where no one wanted her. I ran cold water over my hands, let it drip down my wrists, tried to anchor myself in the feeling. I could hear muffled voices from above dinner moving on without me. My name wouldn't be mentioned. My presence wouldn't be missed. My departure, if I left, wouldn't be recorded. What was I doing here? I'd thought I came to bear witness. But maybe I'd come to be wounded again. Maybe I needed to prove one last time that I was disposable. I sat on the edge of the sink counter and closed my eyes. There's a very specific kind of loneliness that comes from being erased by your own blood. It isn't loud. It doesn't rage. It's quiet. It corrodes slowly. It tells you that maybe they were right not to choose you. And then, layered beneath that, came another voice. Quieter still, almost imperceptible. What if they weren't right? What if your absence is what let them build the story they needed, but it was never the truth? What if your exile wasn't a punishment, but a freedom? I opened my eyes. Same reflection. Same shadows under my eyes. Same soft, tired defiance. I left the restroom, walked slowly through the side hall where the photos of former commanders hung in rows. I stopped in front of one Major General Robert A. Lister. He looked impossibly serious the way old portraits demand. I didn't know him, but he looked like someone who wouldn't blink at discomfort. I imagined standing in front of him, reporting. "Sir, I was not invited, but I attended. I was dismissed quietly and returned anyway. I remain present, though invisible. I await further instruction." I almost laughed, but something steadied in me. I didn't need a new seat at the table. I needed to remember I'd already built my own table miles away from theirs. People had sat there. People I had helped, taught, guided, protected. No one in this ballroom had to know. And still I remained standing. That was the only proof I needed. Still, something in me cracked. Just a little. Not from weakness, but from being tired of the silence. There had been so many years of it. So many, no need to tell them don't make it a thing they won't understand anyway, and I had agreed. Every time. But now, for the first time, I felt the edges of that silence cutting inward. I made my way outside again, out to the same terrace. This time I sat on the low stone ledge. The air had shifted cooler now, dusk rolling in with the scent of pine and memory. I took off my shoes, let my bare feet press against the cold ground. A small act of return. A bird flew overhead. I didn't recognize the species. It cried once, sharp, high-pitched, then disappeared into the tree line beyond the base. I watched the sky for a while. For a moment, I thought of leaving, quietly, walking away without a sound, letting the night fall behind me as I disappeared again. But something held me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the colonel's glance. Maybe it was that young soldier still standing at the door like a sentinel between two worlds. Or maybe it was me, the part that hadn't disappeared, the part that despite everything kept walking back in, even when they didn't see me, even when they didn't want to, even when I wasn't on the list. I didn't move for a long time. The sky darkened slowly above the terrace, a navy blue curtain stitched with stars. From inside the banquet hall, music softened into something slow and ceremonial. Toasts, maybe. A speech. Another carefully folded moment in a night built around applause. But I stayed seated on the stone ledge, bare feet cooling against the earth. And I remembered something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time, stillness as choice. For so long, silence had been my survival strategy. But now for the first time, it was something else an opening. I had spent most of my life letting others believe I was the one left behind. That suited me. I learned young that visibility came with expectations I didn't want. That applause demanded performance. And that in my family value came in rank medals and obedience. So I chose another path. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors or ultimatums. I just quietly stopped reporting in. Instead, I signed up for a fellowship overseas, then another. I trained in conflict negotiation linguistics embedded psychology. I worked in refugee processing sites, places no one in my family had ever heard of. I learned to blend to read danger without speaking, to carry weight without being noticed. In time, that made me useful to people who understood value differently. A classified joint task unit recruited me quietly. I was trained in operational silence, interagency coordination field psychological assessment. It sounds glamorous, but it wasn't. It was long nights in unfamiliar places. It was careful decisions made in moments when emotion would ruin you. It was missions you couldn't name and sacrifices you couldn't explain. But I was good at it. I became someone people trusted, especially when the work was murky, politically sensitive, and deeply human. Back home, none of that existed. To my family, I was the girl who quit ROTC after 2 weeks. The girl who didn't show up for Christmas. The girl who got weird abroad and sent cryptic postcards. That was fine. I never needed them to know. Until now. Because now, for the first time, my name had resurfaced inside a different kind of report. Earlier that month, a quiet alert had been flagged regarding misuse of military facilities connected to private events involving high-ranking families. It wasn't a criminal probe, not yet. Just inconsistencies, rumors, small complaints from junior personnel about abuses of privilege. The case was delicate, and I was the one they called. Not because of my family, but because I could walk into a room full of uniforms and go unnoticed until I needed not to be. That's why I accepted the wedding invitation. That's why I let myself be erased again. I needed to observe. I needed to confirm what I suspected. And I had. The guest list had been altered. Facilities booked under a name not tied to a commanding officer, but signed off with an informal clearance code, one belonging to my sister's spouse. Decorations Security Service billed through a logistical loophole used only for operational ceremonies. It wasn't massive fraud, not yet. But it was the kind of breach that tarnished careers and set off internal inquiries. I didn't want to see my sister punished, but I also didn't want to protect someone who used the system like a family heirloom, so I made a decision I wouldn't disappear this time. I stood up from the ledge, slipped my shoes back on. I checked my phone, one missed message from a secure line confirming the observation team was on site. Quiet, discreet, waiting for my signal. I walked back inside. The mood had shifted. Dessert had been served. The dance floor had opened. My sister was laughing with an older couple from the command's social council. My mother had drifted to the side, fanning herself. I moved to the periphery, standing beside a row of floor-length curtains. The colonel spotted me again. His nod was imperceptible. I had met him once months ago during a roundtable in D.C. He had read my briefing reports. We didn't speak then. But some people remember patterns better than names. And he remembered mine. He tilted his head once, then turned to the woman next to him. Commander Franklin. I recognized her now and handed her a small black case. She stood moved through the crowd with the ease of someone used to cutting diagonals through protocol. And then she stopped in front of me. "Ms. Whitmore," she said quietly. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded. She smiled, kind, clipped official. The soldier at the door moved. 30 minutes later, military police arrived. No lights, no noise. Just 2 plainclothes officers entering with calm purpose and a document packet. The room didn't react right away. Then the murmurs started. I stayed where I was beside the curtains. I didn't need to speak. That had always been my gift, knowing when silence held more weight than speech. And for once, that silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like presence. It felt like power. I didn't need to follow the military police. They weren't here for me. They moved through the crowd like a current beneath still water, subtle, deliberate, trained not to disrupt unless disruption was necessary. But even a ripple changes the surface. People began to turn their heads. A few guests leaned toward each other, whispering. The DJ lowered the volume mid-track, unsure whether to continue. A waiter paused mid-step with a tray of champagne. At the head of the room, my sister stood with her glass raised mid-toast. She saw them, and then she saw me. I was still standing in the same place between 2 pillars near the edge of the ballroom, right beside the drawn curtain. I hadn't moved since Commander Franklin approached me. I didn't need to. There's a kind of reversal that doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly like fog being pulled away from a field. It's quiet, but everyone feels it. I saw it happen in my sister's posture, the slow lowering of her hand, the flicker of confusion chased immediately by calculation. She looked at the colonel, then at the officers, then at me. And in that split second, I saw her try to decide how public she wanted her fear to be. She chose dignity, or something that looked like it. She stepped forward and smiled. "Erin," she said too loudly. "I didn't realize you were still here." A few heads turned. She walked toward me in practiced strides, the same walk she used during family presentations and military luncheons, the one that communicated competence without emotion. I said nothing. She came close enough to lower her voice. "You could have left quietly. What are you doing?" Still, I said nothing. I wasn't here to explain. That wasn't my role anymore. Silence had always been my refuge, but tonight it was something more. It was her mirror. She kept talking. "This is not the place. You have no idea what's going on." But her voice broke slightly on the last word, the kind of crack you only notice if you've spent years listening for it. I tilted my head, not defiance, just observation. She knew then, not just that something had changed, but that it had changed in me. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a demand for attention. This was presence, the kind that can't be dismissed. Across the room, the colonel was speaking to two other officers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. He didn't need to. Authority, when it's real, doesn't announce itself. The officers retrieved a document from the folder. I could see the seal from where I stood Military Property Oversight Division. One of them gestured toward the staging area at the back of the ballroom where event vendors had set up logistics weeks ago. Quietly, they began asking for names, for credentials. Nothing aggressive, nothing disruptive. Just the beginning of an inquiry. My sister turned away from me for just a second, watching the motion unfold. Then she turned back. Her face was still composed, but her eyes weren't. "You think this will change anything?" she said softly. I finally answered. "It already has. 3 words, that's all, and yet they were the heaviest thing I'd said in years." I stepped away, not toward the exit, but deeper into the room. I didn't flinch when people looked. I didn't bow my head or shift my posture to appear smaller. I walked past the family table. My mother reached toward me reflexively. Her hand touched my sleeve. I paused. She didn't speak. She didn't ask what was happening. She just held my arm for a breath. Then let go. That was enough. I continued toward the back where Commander Franklin had joined the MP team. She saw me and gave a small nod, not as a summons but as acknowledgement. It was done. I wasn't there to lead the investigation. That wasn't my assignment. My role was simply to confirm what needed confirming, to observe, to initiate, and to be seen, which ironically required becoming visible for the first time in a very long time. Behind me, the music never returned. The DJ packed up early. The caterers whispered among themselves. Guests began making quiet exits, unsure whether they'd attended a celebration or the start of a scandal. But I didn't stay to see the rest. I walked out the front door, not the side terrace, not the back corridor, the main entrance lined with brass fixtures and clean stone. The same door the general himself had walked through earlier that evening. I stepped into the night. A breeze lifted the hem of my dress. I didn't reach to hold it down. Let the wind carry whatever needed to be let go. I glanced over my shoulder once not to see who followed. No one did, but to take one last look at the place where I'd been made invisible for so long. It didn't feel like exile anymore. It felt like closure. I didn't go home right away. After I left the ballroom, I drove out past the base perimeter and pulled into an unlit overlook just beyond the tree line. The road there curved sharply, a forgotten stretch meant more for old training runs than traffic. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark, listening to the ticking of the hood as it cooled. In the silence, I allowed the weight of the evening to settle. The echo of her voice, the quiet of the crowd, the soft click of uniforms moving with authority. I didn't replay it. I didn't need to. The moment had done what it needed to do. Inside that ballroom, everything had shifted. Not publicly. There was no dramatic announcement, no accusations hurled across microphones. That was never the point. It began with documentation. It would continue with internal reviews, budget audits, a quiet chain of accountability unspooling through the right channels. Names would be checked, authorizations questioned, approvals scrutinized. And somewhere in that process, someone would ask, "Who initiated the report?" My name would come up, not shouted, not celebrated, but remembered, which in this case was enough. 3 days later, I received a message on a secure line, brief and final. Preliminary confirmation of breach. Disciplinary inquiry to follow. Operation thread concluded. Thank you for your service. It was signed by the same colonel who'd looked at me across the ballroom that night. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. I didn't need proof. The silence that followed was proof enough. After that, things moved slowly, at least from the outside. Rumors trickled into the family. My cousin called once, hesitant, asking if I'd heard anything about what happened at the wedding. I said I hadn't. We didn't speak again. My sister never contacted me. But I saw her name removed from an advisory panel listing she'd proudly posted about just a month before. I saw her husband's profile vanish from the event planning committee he once chaired. No press release, no explanation, just subtraction. The same way I had been removed from so many rooms. And now they knew how it felt. But this wasn't revenge. That had never been the goal. I didn't want her to suffer. I only wanted the truth to enter the room, even if it came in quietly unannounced, even if I left before it took its seat. Weeks passed. One morning, while organizing files from a recent assignment, I came across an old envelope. It was addressed to me in my father's handwriting, faded left unread for years. I hadn't known it existed until my mother, without much thought, handed it to me after his funeral. "I think this was for you," she'd said. "Or maybe your sister." I had slipped it into a book and forgotten it. Now I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. My father's pen had always pressed too hard, leaving imprints on the next page. "Erin, you don't have to lead like they do. That's not your road. But I see you. I've always seen you. You move in a different current. And sometimes that current takes you far away from what they think matters. That's okay. That's where truth lives too. Don't let them confuse silence with weakness. Some of the strongest work happens in the quiet. You're not invisible. You're essential. Love, Dad." I held the letter for a long time. Let the words settle into the corners of me that had felt emptied out for years. It didn't erase anything, but it softened the outline of what had been hard for so long. I never told anyone about the letter. I didn't post it. I didn't frame it. Some things are meant to be carried, not displayed. That same week, I received a request to consult on a new interagency task force, civilian-military coordination during high-stakes evacuations. My name had come up from someone who had worked with me abroad. The memo noted my discretion, my ability to remain steady in tense rooms. I accepted. I didn't tell my family. They didn't need to know, because the truth was no longer for them. It was for me. The woman who had once stood at the edge of the ballroom waiting to be seen no longer needed the room to turn toward her. She had already left, and not quietly, but deliberately. The same way you walk into something new with calm and purpose and a silence that speaks. These days, my life is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of being dismissed or ignored, not the hush of a room that's forgotten you're still in it. This silence is chosen. Owned. It's the sound of space I built myself. I live in a small town now, somewhere between coast and sky, where people wave at each other without asking too many questions. My neighbors know me as someone who helps out when needed, who walks early in the morning and locks her door gently at night. They don't know what I do. Not exactly, and that's fine. My job these days is mostly behind a screen, consulting, coordinating, listening. Quiet influence shaped through clarity. I don't wear a uniform. I don't need to. I carry weight differently now. Not like armor, but like gravity, constant, real, and invisible to most. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what my sister tells people now. How she explains the wedding, the abrupt end to the speeches, the slow pulling away of invitations that used to come automatically. Maybe she says it was nothing. A minor mistake. A scheduling issue. That's fine too. She doesn't owe me the truth, and I no longer need it from her. My mother called once months after the event. We talked about mundane things, whether her garden, the neighbor's new puppy. She didn't bring up the wedding, neither did I. But just before hanging up, she paused. "I saw your name," she said, "in something official. I didn't know you did that kind of work." I waited. "I'm glad you were there," she added. Then the line went quiet. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't affection. But it was the first time in years she acknowledged that I'd existed in the same room. And for once, that was enough. I don't visit often. Holidays pass without obligation. My family continues as families do, with or without understanding. I no longer reach for a place at their table, because I've made my own, and those who sit at it know me not by blood, but by truth. I think a lot now about the rooms we build. Some are made of power, of tradition, of hierarchy and applause. Others, quieter ones, are made of endurance, of integrity, of presence. And if you're lucky one day, you realize you were never meant to beg for space inside someone else's house. You were meant to design your own. The work I do now matters not because it's big or loud, but because it touches real things. People who need decisions made in silence, who need someone steady behind the noise. Someone like me. Once someone told me I would never command a room. They were right. I never did. I did something else. I learned to command from the edges, from the quiet, where real decisions begin. And when I think back to that night, to that ballroom with the crystal glasses and closed faces, I don't feel small anymore. I feel measured. I feel like someone who waited long enough for the noise to fall away, and then walked forward, on my own terms. When they didn't give me a seat in the room, I built my own command center.